Great to be here.
Today, we're digging into something really quite fascinating from Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational. Specifically, we're looking at Chapter 9, which he titled, The Effect of Expectations, Why the Mind Gets What It Expects.
Yeah, it's all about how what we think will happen or what we believe about something before we even experience it can fundamentally change, what we actually perceive, what we feel.
It's less about objective facts sometimes and more about the reality our mind kind of constructs for us.
Right. Predictably constructs, even.
That's the key. So our mission today is to unpack these, well, sometimes surprising ways our expectations shape our reality, using the experiments and stories from this chapter as our guide.
Trying to understand how our minds might be playing tricks on us, but in ways we can almost anticipate.
Precisely. So where do we start? I think the book kicks off with a really relatable scenario.
Oh yeah, the sports fan example. Anyone who's watched a game with someone supporting the other team knows this feeling.
Right. He uses, I think, Eagles versus Giants fans watching football.
Yep. And there's that critical moment, maybe a catch near the sideline. It could win the game.
And if you're the Eagles fan, you see it clearly. Feet and bounds, amazing catch. Game over.
But your friend, the Giants fan, sitting right there watching the exact same screen,
Sees it totally differently. Clearly out of bounds.
Yeah.
Terrible call by the ref.
How does that happen? They saw the identical pixels, the same frames. Is one of you just lying or wishing really hard?
Or does that loyalty, that expectation, based on who you want to win, genuinely change what your brain registers as reality? That's the central question Ariely poses, isn't it?
It really is. How can the same event lead to such completely opposite interpretations?
And it's not just trivial stuff like sports. He broadens it out quickly.
Yeah, he connects it immediately to more serious things. Think about politics. Two people, different parties, looking at the same news report, maybe about a struggling school.
One sees personal responsibility failing. The other sees systemic issues.
Exactly. Same facts, totally different conclusions, driven by their pre-existing political framework, their expectations.
Or you see it in arguments between couples, right?
Yeah.
Each person is absolutely certain about who said what or how it started.
Definitely. And the book points to even bigger conflicts. It mentions the IRA and the British, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, sides looking at the same history.
The same sequence of events.
But their deeply held beliefs and expectations about the other side mean they can't possibly agree on who did what or why. Objective truth seems to shrink in those situations.
It makes you realize how hard objective agreement really is when expectations are running the show.
So to kind of pin this down scientifically, in a controlled way, they moved away from these really charged topics.
Smart move.
And they turned to something else people feel strongly about. Beer.
Always a good choice for research subjects.
And where better to do it than the Muddy Charles pub at MIT?
Naturally. So what was the setup?
Pretty simple, actually. They offered people two kinds of beer to taste. One was just a standard commercial brand, like Budweiser or Sam Adams.
What?
The other they called MIT Brew.
Sounds potentially interesting. Or dangerous.
Well, the secret ingredient was just a couple of drops of balsamic vinegar per ounce added to the standard beer.
Balsamic vinegar. In beer. Okay, that's unexpected.
Completely unexpected. But the key was how they gave it to people. Two conditions. First up, a blind tasting.
So people just got 2 cups, maybe labeled A and B, no info.
Exactly. Taste both. Tell us which one you prefer, which one you'd want a full glass of.
And what happened in the blind test?
Yeah.
With the vinegar beer.
Okay, this is where it gets really counterintuitive. A good number of people actually preferred the MIT Brew, the one with the vinegar.
Get out. Really?
Yeah, they found it maybe more interesting, more complex, whatever. They chose it.
So the vinegar itself wasn't automatically bad when they didn't know.
Apparently not, or at least not universally bad. But then came condition 2, the non-blind test. Or let's call it expectation before.
So this time they told people up front.
Yep. Before tasting, they said, okay, this beer, sample B, it has balsamic vinegar in it.
Oh boy. I could just picture the faces.
Totally different reaction. You could see it physically. People would taste it, wrinkle their noses, kind of pull back.
And they overwhelmingly chose the regular beer.
Overwhelmingly. They wanted nothing to do with the vinegar beer once they knew it had vinegar.
So just the idea of vinegar in beer, something that sounds kind of gross, made it taste gross to them, even though blindly they might have liked it.
That seems to be the takeaway. The expectations shaped the actual sensory experience. It wasn't just talk. It was in their mouths.
Wow. Okay, so expectation shapes taste. What else? They looked at presentation too, right?
They did. Another experiment, this time with MBA students. Coffee.
Always a reliable motivator for students.
Right. So free coffee, and alongside it, a table with various things you could add. Some normal, some really weird, like cloves, nutmeg, orange peel, even sweet paprikas.
Paprika in coffee. Okay, now you're just messing with people.
Huh, maybe a little. But the real variable wasn't the weird condiments themselves. It was how they were presented.
How so?
Sometimes these additives were laid out beautifully. Nice glass and metal containers, brushed metal tray, little silver spoons, fancy labels, looked very upscale.
Like a gourmet coffee bar setup.
Exactly. Other times, the exact same stuff was just in like crudely cut styrofoam cups with labels handwritten messily.
Okay, so high-end versus garage sale.
Pretty much. And here's the kicker. The fancy setup didn't actually make people more likely to put, say, paprika in their coffee. That didn't change.
Okay, that makes sense.
The presentation of the condiments had a huge impact on how they rated the coffee itself.
Wait, the coffee was the same in both conditions?
Identical coffee. But when the condiment station looked fancy and upscale, people said they liked the coffee more. Yep. They rated it higher, said they'd be willing to pay more for it, and were more likely to say, yeah, they should serve this in the cafeteria.
That's amazing. Just the visual cues, the atmosphere created by the fancy jars, created an expectation that made the coffee taste better.
It really shows that ambience and presentation aren't just fluff. They set expectations that genuinely change our sensory experience.
Okay, this leads to a deeper question then. Is it just changing our opinion after we taste it? Or does the expectation somehow get in earlier? Does it change the physical sensation itself? They tested the timing, right?
Yeah, this is a really neat twist on the beer experiment. They wanted to see if it matters when you find out about the vinegar.
Before versus after tasting.
Exactly. So one group tasted the MIT brew totally blind first, formed their own impression. Then, after they'd already tasted it, the researchers told them, by the way, that had balsamic vinegar in it.
Okay, so the knowledge came after the initial sensation.
Right. And they compared this group's reaction to the group we already talked about, the ones who were told about the vinegar before they even took a sip.
Big difference.
Huge difference. The people who found out after tasting liked the beer way more than those told before. In fact, their ratings were almost as high as the people in the original blind test who never found out about the vinegar at all.
Whoa. So knowing beforehand seemed to actively spoil the taste, but finding out afterwards didn't really undo the initial positive or neutral impression.
It really suggests that it's like the knowledge before tasting actually altered the brain's processing of the taste signals in real time. The expectation tainted the experience from the start.
But if you already had the untainted experience.
The later information, it had vinegar, had much less power to retroactively change that perception that was already kind of locked in.
Did they follow up on that? Something about adding vinegar later.
Yeah, another interesting bit. They gave people plain beer and then offered them some vinegar to add if they wanted. The people who had learned about the vinegar after their blind taste of MIT brew were actually twice as likely to voluntarily add vinegar to their plain beer compared to the group who'd been warned about it beforehand.
Because their first experience wasn't negative, they were more open to it later.
Seems like it. Their initial positive or neutral blind experience wasn't overridden by the negative expectation associated with vinegar in beer.
Man, expectations are powerful. So how does this play out, outside the lab, in everyday life?
Oh, it's everywhere, especially in commerce and how things are presented. Think about menus. The book gives that great example comparing just ginger chicken
Right, sounds okay.
versus something like succulent organic breast of chicken roasted to perfection, drizzled with a delicate merlot demi-glace, resting on a bed of herbed Israeli couscous.
Okay, yeah, the second one sounds way better. My expectations are definitely higher.
Exactly. And even if the chicken itself is pretty similar, that expectation built by the description will likely make you perceive it as tasting better, more sophisticated.
It makes the experience richer just by reading it.
And it applies at home, too. If you're cooking for guests, using fancy-sounding descriptions, plating the food beautifully, using nice wine glasses, it all builds expectations that enhance their enjoyment.
Even if you used a cake mix or, generic juice.
Right. Or maybe you conveniently forget to mention the Jell-O came from a box.
Oh.
It's about managing those expectations through presentation and language.
Which, as you said, sounds an awful lot like branding and marketing.
Totally.
Huh.
Brands are basically giant expectation machines. Airily brings up the classic Coke versus Pepsi challenge.
Yeah, the paradox. Pepsi often wins blind tests.
But Coke wins when people see the can or the logo.
Why is that? If the taste is preferred blind for Pepsi.
Well, neuroscientists actually put people in fMRI scanners to figure this out. They had them taste Coke and Pepsi, sometimes blind, sometimes knowing which was which.
Okay, looking inside the brain, what did they see?
When it was blind, the basic pleasure center of the brain, it's called the VMPFC, lit up pretty similarly for both. Makes sense. People might slightly prefer Pepsi sweetness, perhaps.
Right.
But when people knew they were drinking Coke, a different area became really active, the DLPFC. That's more about higher level thinking, memory, associations.
So seeing the Coke logo triggered all the memories, the ads, the feelings associated with the Coke brand.
Exactly, all that cultural baggage and personal history. And here's the really fascinating part. The activity in that higher level brain area, the DLPFC, triggered by the brand, actually seemed to boost the activity down in the basic pleasure center, the VMPFC.
No way. So the brain didn't just add a layer of thought, it actually made the physical sensation of tasting Coke more pleasurable in the brain.
That's what the study suggests. The expectation, built by decades of branding, literally changed the neural experience of the taste itself. It made it taste better, in a way.
That is kind of mind-blowing. All that marketing money actually changing brain chemistry.
It's a powerful demonstration. And this effective expectation isn't limited to things we eat or drink. The author then shifts to how it affects our view of people.
Right, this is where stereotypes come into play.
Exactly. Stereotypes are basically just expectations we have about groups of people. They're mental shortcuts, the brain trying to be efficient, not always used maliciously, but they are generalizations.
Like assuming an older person won't get tech or a Harvard student must be brilliant.
Those kinds of things.
Hmm.
But the danger is these expectations aren't harmless background noise.
No, they can really impact things.
Massively. The chapter highlights how stereotypes influence not just how we see others, but can actually change the behavior of the people being stereotyped. That experiment with Asian American women and the math test is pretty stark.
You mean where they reminded some of them that they were women before the test and others that they were Asian?
That's the one.
Hmm.
And the group subtly reminded of the stereotype women aren't good at math actually performed worse on the test, while reminding them of the stereotype Asians are good at math didn't have that negative impact. It's like priming the negative expectation actually caused them to fulfill it.
That's deeply concerning. And it affects people who aren't even being stereotyped too, right?
Right.
The studies with the sentences.
Yeah, those are wild. One had people unscramble sentences that secretly contained words related to rudeness.
Like interrupt or bother.
Right, and those people were significantly more likely to actually interrupt the experimenter later on compared to people who got neutral or polite words.
Just reading the words unconsciously primed them to be rude.
Seems like it. And the other one, even stranger maybe? People unscrambled sentences with words associated with the elderly, like wrinkle, Florida, bingo.
Okay.
And afterwards, these young college students were timed walking down a hallway, and they actually walked slower than the control group.
Get out of here. Just thinking about old made them walk slower.
Unconsciously, yes. It shows how deep these stereotype-based expectations run. They can influence our own physical actions without us even realizing it.
Which really brings us full circle back to the heavy stuff, the conflicts we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah. This whole body of research gives us a lens to understand why those conflicts are so intractable. When you have groups with long histories of mistrust, like the Israeli-Palestinian situation or others mentioned.
And their expectations are just so negative and baked in.
Exactly. They literally can't view the actions of the other side objectively. Every event, every statement gets filtered through this lens of, see, they're doing it again. It just confirms their existing negative expectations.
So they're trapped in their own perspectives, unable to see the truth the other side sees because their expectation is blinding them.
And the more invested they are emotionally, the more fiercely they defend that perspective. Ariely calls it a catastrophic failure when trying to have dialogue without addressing this underlying expectation bias first. You can't even agree on the basic facts of what happened.
Sounds pretty bleak. Is there any way out? Does the research offer any hope?
It points towards a couple of potential avenues, though they're definitely not easy fixes. One idea comes straight from the beer study. Try to create a blind condition.
How would that work in a conflict?
Well, maybe you present proposals or historical accounts of actions without initially saying which side proposed them or did them.
Like tasting the beer without knowing about the vinegar first. Remove the label.
Exactly. The hope is that if you strip away the immediate us versus them filter, the substance of the idea or the event can be evaluated a bit more objectively on its own merits.
That makes sense, but it sounds hard to implement in reality.
Very hard. So, when blinding isn't possible, the next best thing, according to the research, is conscious acknowledgement of our own bias.
Just admitting that our view is shaped by our expectations.
Yes. Accepting, as Ariely puts it, that we're essentially trapped within our perspective, and that our expectations mean we're only seeing part of the truth. It requires a certain humility.
Realizing you can't be purely objective is maybe the first crucial step.
And it really underscores why neutral third parties are so vital in mediation. You need someone who isn't caught up in the same web of expectations and historical biases that the conflicting parties are.
Someone who can offer that less distorted view.
Right. So when you pull all this together, from how you experience the taste of beer or coffee, to how you interpret a news story, to how you judge other people, it's kind of staggering just how much our expectations dictate our reality.
It really is. So the final thought for you, listening right now, might be this. How much of your day-to-day experience is being shaped, maybe even distorted, by what you expect?
Yeah, what would happen if you consciously tried to approach something, a food, a person, an opinion piece, by trying to set aside your preconceptions? Could you create your own little blind test and see if the reality feels different?
It's definitely a challenging idea, but one that this deep dive really makes you consider. Thanks so much for joining us as we unpack the power of expectation.
It's truly fascinating how much the mind gets what it expects. A powerful reminder.
Absolutely. And make sure you join us next time on the deep dive. We'll be exploring another powerful, often invisible force, the influence of price. Not just on what we buy, but how effective we think things are, even medicine.
Oh, yeah, that's another great chapter. Looking forward to it.
It's going to be another fascinating journey into predictable irrationality.